Ever wish you could just soak up a new language like kids do?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, they make it seem so effortless.
Right. It's incredible.
Today, we're diving deep into how we learn languages, trying to figure out the magic formula. Is it all about those grammar books and verb conjugations, or is there more to the story?
Well, what's so fascinating about this deep dive
Mm-hmm.
is that we've all been language learners at some
Oh,
point.
for sure. We've all got those classroom memories, some fonder than others, I'm sure.
Exactly. But it makes you wonder, how much did those experiences actually help?
Right. Where do we even begin to unpack this?
Well, picture this. There's this whole school of thought called the get it right in the end approach.
Get it right in the end. Okay, I'm intrigued.
And before you think, oh, so just wing it.
Mhm.
It's actually more nuanced than that.
Okay, so tell me more. What does that even mean?
So it's about finding that sweet spot between fluency, being able to communicate freely, and accuracy, actually getting it grammatically right.
So, not throwing grammar entirely out the window, but also not getting totally bogged down by it, finding that middle ground.
Exactly. It's like you want to enjoy the journey of speaking the new language, right?
Of course.
But you also need to understand the rules of the road to actually navigate it effectively.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be stuck using broken language forever.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
So, how does this get it right in the end approach actually play out in, say, a real classroom?
Okay, let's transport ourselves to a classroom in France.
Ooh, I love it.
Imagine a group of, say, 12-year-old French students who are learning English.
Okay, I'm picturing it. Berets, baguettes. What are they working on?
So they're tackling sentence structure. They're rearranging these scrambled words.
Classic.
And one of the sentences, sometimes my mother makes good cakes.
Okay, now that's a sentence I can get behind.
Right. It highlights how even a simple sentence has these subtle grammatical nuances.
For sure.
And one student, they rearrange it as, my mother makes sometimes good cakes.
My mother makes sometimes good cakes. Hmm.
Grammatically, it's not, completely wrong,
Right.
but it's a little off, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. It sounds a bit unnatural in English.
Exactly.
So, how does the teacher address this using this get it right in the end approach? Do they whip out the grammar rulebook?
Instead of launching into a complex grammar lesson,
Okay.
the teacher might say something like, that sounds a bit yucky to me.
Yucky.
Okay.
So, it's kind of a playful way to point out the error without overwhelming them with technical terms.
Exactly. It's like by using a word like yucky, the teacher subtly helps the students notice the more natural word order without getting bogged down in the nitty-gritty of grammar rules. It's about developing that feel for the language.
Right, like a gentle nudge in the right direction.
Yeah.
But I mean, does this subtle approach actually work? Shouldn't we be hitting those grammar rules hard? Does that really translate into real-world language skills?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? To answer that, we actually have to jump into some fascinating research. Back in the 1980s, researchers did these studies
Oh, cool.
on, you guessed it, French-speaking students learning English in Canada.
Those poor kids. Double the grammar trouble. Okay, so what did these studies actually involve?
So they wanted to see if dedicated explicit grammar lessons were truly effective.
Okay, makes sense. So how did they test that?
They divided the students into two groups. One group, they had regular communicative English classes.
Okay, so focusing on speaking and listening, like real-world use.
Exactly. Well, the other group, they received those same classes, but they also got these extra grammar lessons on top of that.
Ah, so same foundation, but one group got a grammar boost.
Interesting. What were they learning in those bonus lessons? Anything specific?
Researchers really honed in on areas that are typically tricky for French speakers learning English.
Oh, I bet there are a few. Like what?
Well, one study focused specifically on adverb placement,
Ah, interesting. Adverbs.
which, as you know, has different rules in French and English. Right, just like in our cake baking example earlier.
Exactly.
So, did those extra grammar lessons pay off? Were those students suddenly speaking more accurately?
So here's where it gets really interesting. Immediately after those grammar-focused lessons, the students who had that extra adverb training, they did show improvement.
Okay, so they aced those adverb quizzes.
Exactly. However, a year later, those gains had faded.
Wait, really? So all that grammar cramming for nothing? That's kind of discouraging.
It's not so black and white. You see, language learning, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
That's a good way to put it.
One theory is that maybe they weren't actively using those specific adverb constructions in their daily lives. It's a case of use it or lose it, right?
Totally. Like that old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Exactly. And you can explain the rules, but you can't make someone actually use them.
Right. It's about making it stick.
Yes. And there's actually another layer to this research because they also looked at explicit grammar lessons on question formation.
Okay, so still grammar, but this time questions instead of adverbs.
Right. And this is where it gets fascinating. Those gains, those actually stuck around long term.
Interesting. So why would questions be different from adverbs? I mean, they're both grammar points, right?
Well, think about it. If you mess up a question, you might not understand the answer, which directly impacts communication.
Oh, that's true. It's much higher stakes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because questions are so crucial for real-life conversations, researchers believe that those students were more likely to pay attention and actually continue using the correct forms even after those lessons ended.
So it's not just about learning the grammar rule, it's about whether you're actually using it in a meaningful way.
Yes, and it gets even more interesting when we look beyond those traditional grammar drills. Studies have shown that focusing on what we call social language is absolutely crucial.
Okay, social language. I like the sound of that. Tell me more.
So it's all about navigating those subtle nuances of politeness, formality, cultural context.
Oh, I see, like knowing when to say vous versus tu in French.
Exactly. It's one thing to know verb conjugations, but knowing when to use them appropriately, that's social language in action.
Right. Otherwise, you risk sounding either way too stiff or way too casual, and that's not something you can just pick up from a textbook, right?
Exactly. It goes even deeper than that. Even young children learning French, for example, they benefit from understanding grammatical gender.
Oh, right, like using le or la with nouns.
Yes, but instead of just memorizing lists, playful games that highlight those differences, that's what really makes it stick.
So making it fun and relevant, no matter the age. It makes you wonder, though, is it all on the teacher to deliver this perfect blend of grammar and social language? It seems like a lot to juggle.
It really does take a village. And actually, you might be surprised to learn that one of the most powerful learning tools isn't the teacher at all. It's other students.
Oh, interesting. Like a language learning buddy system.
More than a buddy system, actually. It can be transformative.
Yeah.
There was this study where students worked together to write a story in French.
Okay, a team effort.
Right. And then later they compared their version to a polished one, grammatically
So
correct.
they got to see kind of a pro version, a model to compare against, and figure out where their own writing had gone off track.
Exactly. It's like having a built-in editor. But here's the thing. This noticing process, it actually led to big improvements in their own writing later on.
Wow, so it really stuck with them.
Right. It's like they internalized those corrections more deeply than if a teacher had just told them the rules.
That makes sense. It's one thing to be told a rule, but another to actually see it in action, especially with your own work.
And there's something about explaining it to someone else.
Right? Like you have to really understand it to teach it.
Exactly. So it reinforces your own understanding, too. It's a win-win for everyone.
Collaborative learning for the win. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from those yucky sentences to grammar drills to the power of our language learning buddies. What's the big takeaway, the aha moment for our listeners?
I think the biggest takeaway is that there isn't one right way to learn a language.
Right, everyone's different.
Exactly. Some people thrive on immersion, just diving into the deep end. Others need those grammar rules as a framework.
It's about finding what works for you.
And that might even change depending on what you're trying to learn. Like those questions versus adverbs, remember?
Oh, absolutely. That was fascinating.
Right. So here's a question for your own language learning journey. Think back to your own experiences. What really clicked for you?
Ooh, that was a good question. For me, it was definitely a mix of things. I had a fantastic teacher who made grammar fun, but I also learned a ton just chatting with friends who were native speakers.
And that's often how it happens, right? It's not just one thing. There's no magic formula.
Right, it's about finding that perfect blend.
But by understanding these different approaches, how they work together, you can tailor your own WN language learning journey, make it more effective and more enjoyable.
I love that. It's empowering to know we have options. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our language learning deep dive. From classrooms in France to some pretty groundbreaking research, we've covered it all.
Until next time, keep those language skills sharp. And most importantly, keep learning and keep exploring.